Welcome to Fly Easy Not Crazy. As I talk to friends and other pilots in training, I realize a lot of private pilots do not have a plan for their instrument rating and commercial certification. They just fly to get their hours without necessarily thinking about the best way to go about it. I decided to put this presentation together to help private pilots plan for their instrument rating and commercial certification. I will also give you a few tips and tricks I use or wish I had used during my training. All the flight examples I will give you are from the Phoenix area, but you can use the same concept for your airport. As a reminder, I am a commercial pilot and not a CFI. I'm just sharing my personal experience with you. Remember to subscribe, press the like button, and you can follow me on Instagram at FlyEasyNotCrazy. Let's go over the agenda. First, we'll talk about some preparation you will need to do. Next, I will tell you what I think you should study and give you a plan for some of your flight. This step needs to be done before you start flying. Then we'll go over other things you should do during your flight and how to train for your instrument rating. After that, we'll talk about your instrument check ride. It will be mostly about the ground part and some tips for the flying section. Next, you pass your instrument rating. I will go over some of the knowledge you need for your commercial and what to study. Then we'll go over the flying part to get you to 250 hours and talk about when to start your commercial training. And we will end with your commercial check ride. Here is my first tip. Your commercial training starts now on day one. You need to understand the requirements defined in the ACS, because you need to know the ACS standard by which you will be evaluated during your check ride. For example, altitude plus or minus 100 feet, airspeed plus or minus 10 knots, VY plus or minus 5 knots on takeoff, and touchdown within 200 feet beyond your spot for normal landing. It's crucial for you to know those numbers, and you should target to be within those numbers for all your flight, starting now. You want to build good habits from day one and not wait the last minute. Always fly with somebody else, except if you are working on your solo time. In general, in a cross country, one person does one way and the other person does the way back. It's cheaper because now you can share the cost and you can log most of the flight as a safety pilot. If you are working on your instrument, do your cross-country with the instrument-rated pilot. If you are instrument-rated, fly with both instrument student and instrument-rated pilot. Helping instrument student will reinforce your knowledge and give you a first test of training other. Flying with another instrument-rated pilot allows you to fly IFR. Flying is expensive. If you do not need the solo hours and you are working on your commercial maneuvers, ask one of your CFI friends if he or she wants to be your right seat. Like this, he or she can get hours for free, and you never know, the person may return the favor later on, or somebody else may do the same for you. Remember, each pilot has his or her own way to do pre-flight inspection, run-up, communication, setup, and fly the airplane. By flying with somebody else, you may learn things which may surprise you. We all handle cockpit management differently, and it's always a good experience to see how somebody else does it. For example, I flew with a pilot who put ATC on COM1 and the destination tower on COM2, but at a lower volume. This allows him to know if the airport is busy and define the best way to land at the airport. We all know the aviate, navigate, and communicate. This is how to prioritize a task in an airplane. I will add one more, educate. I challenge you to educate yourself and know everything about the airplane. Once again, flying is expensive and you want to maximize your money. Every time you fly, you need to learn something about the airplane. Here are the few ideas. Does your plane have a playback button for communication? Do you know all the menu and button in your airplane? Can you connect your ForFly with the airplane and transfer flight plan or other information? Do you know all the autopilot feature? How to set up an approach or a flight plan? Does your plane have a GPS or what? Do you know how to check if it's working? Does your plane have a map? And what are the options? This is just a short list on what you should do with your time when you are flying. Educate, educate, and educate yourself. Find a way to make flying easier. Improve your setup in the plane, the way you take note. Find acronym to write instruction. And the most important, if you are flying cross-country, go through the steps you would take if you had an engine fire or failure. A, B, C. Airspeed, best place to land, checklist. More you repeat those steps, more natural they will come during your commercial check ride. For instrument and commercial, you will need to fly a lot of cross-country. And you need to understand what is a cross-country. I put a link of an article from Ball Method in the description. But here is the most important part for us. One point of landing must be at least 50 nautical miles in a straight line distance from the original airport. Now you can fly to an airport 50 nautical miles away, but spend 2 or 3 hours doing this flight. The full time is counted for cross-country. As far as I know, you could spend 1 hour doing touch and go, then fly to an airport 50 nautical miles away, and the full time will count as cross-country. In this video, I won't tell you where to find the information. I will just tell you what are the most important sections to know. I personally prefer having my written done before starting my training. But I know some people like to do it at the last minute, to have everything fresh in their mind for the check ride. Just remember, you don't want to finish your training and be delayed by your written. I will advise you to use a ground school for knowledge and for your written. If you're like me and use Shepherd Hair, this is not enough. Shepherd Hair is great to help you pass a written, but it won't give you the knowledge you need for your check ride. In this section, I'm going to talk about what you should study and plan before flying. First, you need to download the IFR Quick Study Guide from Pilot Cafe. This is a must. This is one of the best study guides for IFR. You can find the link in the description. Here is an old version of the study guide. This version is 21 pages, but I think the new version is around 30 pages. This guide contains valuable information for your instrument and commercial check ride. My advice is for you to read this document at least once a day. Like this, by the time you finish your training, you will have memorized most of the concepts you need for your IFR check ride. Before starting to fly, you need to know what is an approach, a departure procedure, and an IFR clearance. How to read the different types of approach plate, GPS, VOR, and ILS. Understand what is an IFR clearance, acronym CRAFT. Because if you are a safety pilot for an instrument-rated pilot, he may file IFR, do the departure procedure, and cancel IFR after takeoff. And while on VFR, he may request and do an approach at your destination airport. This is a great opportunity for you to see another pilot go through this process. And it's free. Now, you may want to do a few training flights with your instructor first. but this is a good way to save money and optimize your training. A big part of your aeronautical experience for instrument is cross-country and actual or simulated instrument time. 50 hours for cross-country and 40 hours for actual or simulated instrument time. 15 of those 40 hours must be with a double I. Your plan must not be to just fly cross-country here and there without a goal. The commercial aeronautical experience requires a few cross-countries, and now is the time to get them done. Let's take a look at the commercial aeronautical experience for those flights. It's under the training section, which means you will have to do those fly with a CFI. 1 2-hour cross-country fly in a single-engine airplane in daytime condition that consists of a total straight line distance of more than 100 nautical miles from the original point of departure. For the other flight, it's exactly the same, but at nighttime. You have two options to handle those flights. First, you can just find an airport over 100 nautical miles away from your original airport. In this case, we'll use Scottsdale as the original airport and Tucson being 100 nautical miles away. You will fly to the airport and do an approach there. Flag back, do a couple of approaches on your way back and make sure your flight time is 2 hours or more. Then here in this case, you will fly from Scottsdale to Tucson, and after from Tucson, you can fly back, do an approach at Marina, do another approach at Coolidge, do another approach at Gateway, and do an approach at Scottsdale. The flight should take you more than 2 hours. You can do that during the day and during the night, and that will take care of those flights. Option 2, you will find an airport at least 2 hours away and more than 100 nautical miles from your original airport. In our example, we'll fly from Scottsdale to Page. You will fly to Page during the day, go eat dinner, and wait for nighttime. Then you can fly back at night. This option takes care of both cross countries at the same time. Make sure you can get gas at your destination airport. Some airports like Page do not have a self-service and the FBOs close at 5 p.m. Another option for the Phoenix area pilot is to fly to Las Vegas. For instrument, you need an IFR fly of 250 nautical miles and 3 different kinds of approaches. For commercial, you need a VFR flight not less than 300 nautical miles, with landing at a minimum of 3 points, one of which is a straight line distance of at least 250 nautical miles from the original departure point. This is a solo cross-country or can be done with an authorized instructor. You should combine both flights. Here is an example for the IFR part. This is not a real flight plan, it's just to show you the airport. Starting from Scottsdale, you will fly to Blythe and do a GPS or VOR approach. Then head to Jacqueline Cochran and do a GPS or VOR approach based on what you did at Blythe. Next is Carlsbad for the ILS approach. Now, time to go swimming for a well-deserved break. You enjoy the California weather and it's time to head back to Scottsdale. You can fly from Carlsbad to Gateway, then Falcon Field, and finish your commercial cross-country at Scottsdale. As far as I understand, your CFI cannot give you instruction during this flight, and you should not log training received for this flight. And this is how you can combine both cross-countries. You can follow a similar approach for your home airport. Just remember, one way must be IFR and the other way VFR. For your commercial, you are going to need 5 hours of solo nighttime and 10 landing and takeoff at a tower airport at night. First, find a tower airport where you can do stop and go. You don't want to waste time doing a full stop taxi back. Next is a trick to get more cross-country time and do your commercial aeronautical requirement at the same time. Remember, you just need to fly 50 nautical miles away from your original airport to log cross-country time. Here is an example starting from Deer Valley, right here. You can do a couple of stop and go at Deer Valley, which is a tower airport. Then you fly to Coolidge, right here, which is 56 nautical miles away in a straight line, and you can even shoot an approach there. You cannot log it because you are not with an authorized instructor, but it can be good training before your instrument check right. After that, you can even go to Gateway here and do a few more stop and go. It should take you around 1.5 to 1.8 hours to do that. If you do this 3 times, you will have 5 or more hours of cross-country to count toward your instrument and be done with your night flights for commercial. Look for a similar setup at your home airport to use this trick. Now, you have a plan for what you are going to learn while flying, and you have a basic knowledge of what is an approach plate, departure procedure, and IFR clearance. It's time to fly and start your training. As I mentioned before, you need 50 hours of cross-country. You need to make every flight a cross-country, even when you are training with your instructor. The only exception is when you are at the end of your training and you need to focus on your check ride. Remember, you want to build good habits from the start. Here are 3 important habits to take. First, start your timer just before takeoff. It's especially important to build this habit for your check ride. Second, bug your runway heading. This will help you keep runway heading on takeoff. Third, all your turns should be standard rate turn. Standard rate turn is accomplished at 3 degrees per second, resulting in a 360 turn in 2 minutes. Your banking will depend on your airspeed. Most planes have a way to identify if you are doing a standard rate turn. This is the best way to save money. You want to share fly as much as possible. You want to learn and practice as much as possible on the ground. Here is a list of what to share fly. Always prepare your next fly. You need to share fly all the procedures you are going to do during your next fly. You need to share fly all the approaches in your area. You should have a step-by-step process. For example, I will listen to ITs 5 minutes from the airport. Then I will build the approach. Next, I will brief the approach and do the checklist. And act as if you are in the plane. Think about adjusting power, the descent rate you are going to use, and when are you going to put the flap. This is learning by repetition. When you will do the approach, your brain and body will act automatically. Remember, you need to practice the missed approach too. Some missed approaches are very complex. Another thing to remember is to press the missed approach button. Share fly is all about acting based on information you gather. In the case of a missed approach, the first trigger is you cannot land. The actions are press the missed approach button, full power, and pull the yoke to climb to 2,800 feet. Next trigger is the climb. The action is to adjust how much you are pulling on the yoke to be at VY. The next trigger, are positive rate of climb and sufficient speed. Action is to remove the flap. The next trigger is loss of lift because of the flap. Action is to decrease your pull on the yoke. Next trigger is altimeter at or above 2,800 feet. Action, start a right turn and climb to 5,000 feet. You can do your share fly like this and think about what is going to be your trigger. You can use this technique for any share fly you do. This is another thing to pay attention to. You need 40 hours of actual or simulated instrument. Just plan your fly accordingly. If you're taking your check ride in a G1000, for example, you have a primary fly display and a multifunction display. Your DPE may dim the light on your primary flight display. If this happens, you need to press the display backup button. Now your MFD will have your primary flight display information. You need to practice flying and doing approaches while looking at your MFD. Now, let's talk about the IFR check ride. How should you prepare for it, and a trick you may use in the fly portion of your check ride. Similar as your private pilot check ride, the DPE should ask you to create an IFR fly plan. You need to create a step-by-step process on how to create this fly plan. Your DPE will ask you to walk him through the process you used and explain the decision you took. If you have this process written down, you can use it during your check ride and explain everything you checked and the reason why you planned the flight the way you did. Let's take a look at an example. First, gather the information for the flight: passenger and luggage weight, departure, and destination. Do a weight and balance to know the maximum amount of gas you can take. And you can see we are going through the acronym NW craft. Plan the fly in 4-fly. Based on the minimum gas required, decide if you need to stop in the way. Look at suggested route by 4-fly and the minimum altitude. Check if you need an alternate. Calculate your takeoff, landing, and rate of climb. Check runway length for destination and alternate. Compare with your minimum. Go over the briefing to make sure everything is okay, which means weather, the current weather, forecast, and the NOTAMs. Go through the acronym PAVE. Go through the acronym Am I Safe? Check the airplane maintenance log using Aviate. Check to make sure you have your ID, pilot license, and medical. During your pre-fly inspection, check for Aero PC. If something is not working, use racket, then a tomato flame, grab card, and flap if needed. This is just an example of a step-by-step process you can use to make sure you don't miss anything. You need to know how to calculate your minimum takeoff, landing, and cruise climb. You did something similar for your private pilot check ride, but now you must be more precise. For example, you need to explain that your takeoff, landing, and cruise climb depend on the airport temperature and pressure altitude. You need to know how to calculate the pressure altitude too. Here is what I use for my check ride. Here you have departure airport, destination, and the alternate. The temperature at the airport, the altitude at the airport, and the climb altitude, the altitude that I want to climb to or that I will descend from, right here. The temperature for this altitude, the altimeter at the airport, the runway length at the airport. Here it's for me to know the distance and time and gas that I will need. Here are the minimum at the airport. That means if there is a minimum for the approach. I automatically calculate the pressure altitude at the airport, the pressure altitude at the climb altitude, my takeoff and short field, my short field landing, takeoff climb, cruise climb. And I have also table in another place here where I take the information from. This is copy from the POH. And this is what I use for my check ride. This shows the DPE that I understand how to calculate the pressure altitude, how to calculate the takeoff and short field, how to calculate all those information. With your instrument rating, you will be able to fly in the cloud. You need to understand the risk and what you should pay attention to. This is most likely a question you may get during the ground part of your check ride. You need to know how to find the base and top of the cloud, the freezing level, and all the type of icing you may encounter. Ball Method has great articles and videos about IFR. You should go over all the available IFR related videos, articles, and quizzes. It will help you tremendously. Next, you must know how all the instrument works. How does the altimeter VSI works, for example, and how some instruments are getting their data from the same source. Which brings us to my next bullet point, instrument malfunction. What happens if the pitot tube or your static port are blocked? What will you do if your heading indicator is not working? Go through as much what-if scenario as you can. You never know what the DPE will come up with. Next, let's talk about your flight briefing. You need to review your briefing before your check ride. Pay special attention to the NOTAMs and make sure you can explain them. Another thing to pay attention to is some of the weather chart given by ForFlight. Make sure you understand everything in the chart, even if it does not apply to your route. Here is an example. Let's say you are flying in the middle of Texas. You are not affected by all those notations here and here. But the DPE may ask you about them. Be ready for it. For lost communication, your DPE may just present you with a case scenario during your ground and ask you what you should do. This is the easy part. On the other hand, the DPE may give you a mock-up IFR flight plan to fly, and they will do a lost communication scenario while flying. This is why you need to take the habit to start the timer just before your takeoff, because your altitude may depend on the time you flew. Be ready and practice this case scenario. It's different to go through the logic on the ground versus when you are flying the airplane. Now, here is a trick to help you for your check ride. In general, the DPE will allow you to use the autopilot for one of the approaches, except the ILS. And they will tell you all the approaches you are going to do. You have two options. You can use the autopilot for the approach you don't know very well or you don't like. Or if you fly with the PFD and MFD, you use the autopilot when the DPE dims the light of the PFD. You still need to press the display backup button, but it will be easier to fly the approach. You're done with your instrument. Now, what do you need to do? For commercial, I separated the knowledge section from the fly and training. You can do both at the same time. It's not like instrument where you need to study before flying. First, you need to understand what it means to be a commercial pilot, what you can do and cannot do. This is one of the first things your DPE will ask you. You must understand the concepts of common and private carriage, holding out, commercial operator, wet and dry lease. And Know some of the exceptions from 119.1. You can also read Advisory Circular 120-12. It will really help you. Next, you need to read the ACS and understand all the maneuvers and how to do them. Watch videos which explain the maneuver. Before starting your first fly with your CFI, you need to have a basic understanding of all the maneuvers and a basic process to share fly each maneuver. After you do a couple of flies with your CFI, you need to add more detail to your share fly. Let's take the chandel as an example with a left turn. Your basic share fly can be full power, bank left, and keep your bank constant. Increase pitch, after 90 degrees turn, keep pitch and decrease bank. After 180 degrees turn from the start, get on straight level fly. Your advanced share fly can be pre-maneuver. Find a point on my left wing at 90 degrees. Start the maneuver, full power. Bank left to 30 degrees and maintain the bank. Increase the pitch slowly. Look at your instrument to maintain bank. Look outside at your reference point. Your reference point is in front of you. Pitch should be between 13 to 20 degrees. Reduce the bank and maintain the pitch. Check your speed and look outside at your reference point. Your reference point is on your right wing at 90 degrees. Speed should be close to stall speed and you should have your wings level. Recover to straight and level fly without losing any altitude. You can add more detail. This is just an example. You want to have a procedure for each maneuver and update your process as you learn more about the maneuver. This will help you build muscle memory and proficiency. Next, you need to learn everything you can about the airplane, which means reading your airplane POH. Here are a couple of important items to know about your airplane. How does the engine start and works? What type of engine do you have? How does the fuel go to the engine? Learn about the electrical system of your airplane. I'm just giving you some examples. You must know and understand how your airplane functions. You need to review what you learn about the weather from your private pilot and instrument check ride. The IFR study guide from Pilot Cafe has a good section about weather, but it's not enough. You cannot have any doubt about reading meters, TAF, pipe rep, wind aloft, or any other weather chart. Weight and balance is not about just making sure you are within the range. You need to understand normal and utility category. If you have two passengers and one is skinnier than the other, which passenger will sit in the front and what is the impact? This is changing where your center of gravity is, but what are the advantages and disadvantages? The last thing, you should already know from your instrument training about when to use oxygen and the different altitude. It's important to review this. Adding to this, you need to know the type of oxygen system you can use based on the altitude. And don't forget to learn how the pressurization system works and the impact of depressurization. Now, if you follow my previous advice, by now you should not have to worry about holding altitude, speed, normal takeoff, and normal landing. And you should have most of your aeronautical requirements for commercial. Only things missing will be some solo time, training time, and get to 250 hours. If you are not flying a complex turbine power or a technical advanced airplane as part of your regular training, You need to remember that you will need 10 hours of training in one of those. I think the cheapest will be to do your 10 hours in a technical advanced airplane, which is an airplane with an electronical advanced avionics system, like a G1000. My first advice for you is to stay IFR current. If you need to fly more cross-country before starting your training, you should try to shoot some approach. You don't want to pay an instructor to fly with you to get your currency back. Fly with an instrument pilot student to help them. Passing your instrument check ride does not mean the training is over. It just means you are competent enough to fly IFR by yourself. You don't want to lose all the training you did. Most CFI will tell you to start at 225 hours. You should need around 25 hours to get all the maneuvers, landing, and takeoff. In my point of view, I will say start a little bit sooner, like 220 hours. The reason to start a little bit sooner is to keep some hours to train by yourself. It's cheaper to practice the maneuvers by yourself than with a CFI in the plane with you. First, do a couple of flights with your CFI to learn the maneuvers, landing, and takeoff. Then, you can practice the takeoff and landing during your cross-country, and you can train by yourself. This brings me to my next point. Most of you are going to do your CFI next. When you are training without your CFI, this is the best time to get yourself familiar with the practice area. Make the radio call and build your confidence. It's different to fly across country versus flying in a practice area with plane flying in all the directions. When we are training, we don't worry so much about the other planes because our instructor is taking care of this. But when you will be a CFI, you will have to deal with this. My next advice is to schedule your check ride in advance. Depending on your DPE, you may have to schedule a month in advance. This can be good if they give you your check ride flight plan in advance. First, it gives you more time to prepare the flight plan. But the best part about it is your DPE will most likely make you fly to the first or second point of your flight plan, depending on the distance. This is the good news for you, because now you know the area where you will have to do your maneuvers. You need to go there and practice in this area. Find reference point for all your maneuvers. The power of 180 is, I think, the most difficult things you will have to do during your check ride. A power of 180 simulates an engine failure when you are downwind abeam the 1,000 foot marker. You need to land on the 1,000 foot marker with the power idle. The two main things you control are the route you take to go to the runway and when and how much flap to put. You can also do a slip if you are too high. I am going to give you a tip my CFI told me. It really made a difference for me, and I hope it will help you too. You need to count down how much altitude you have between you and the ground. For example, when you start your power of 180, you should be at 1,000 feet. Then you had 10 degrees of flap and change your angle of attack to be at your best gliding speed. This should help you climb to 1,100 feet above the ground. Now, for every 100 feet you descend, you need to call out the altitude, 1,000, 900, 800, 700, and so on. This will help you realize if you are descending fast or slow. It will help you decide if you should add flap or not, and if you just need to fly to the number because you are too low. In my case, I knew that I needed to be 300 feet above the displacement threshold with relative calm wind and full flap to make it to the 1,000 foot marker. During my check ride, I was 200 feet above the displacement threshold, with relative calm wind and 20 degrees of flap. I knew I was in trouble. I had to act, and hold the plane up to make it to the 1,000 foot marker, which I managed to do. I like to base my decision on numbers. Some people are able to judge what to do just by looking at the runway, but this was not always working for me. Calling out my remaining altitude really made a difference for me, and I hope it will be the same for you. The ground part of your commercial check ride is pretty much going to be the same as your private pilot check ride. The only difference is your DPE will ask you more detailed questions. Let's take the example of weight and balance. During a private pilot check ride, you just need to show that the airplane could take off. Now, you need to know more and have a better understanding of the impact of the weight placement in the plane and the fuel consumption. The questions are going to be more technical and more difficult. This check ride is to allow you to get paid to fly, with, of course, a lot of limitation. Now, this is more than a hobby. It's a license to work. You need to show that you are a professional. You need to base your statement and action to reflect the fact that you are a professional and you know what you are doing. Your DPE needs to be confident in your knowledge and in your skill. I'm going to give you some examples on how to show that in my next 2 bullet points. Before your ground, have everything ready. This means make sure your ID, pilot license, medical, and logbook are out. You should have all your paperwork ready for the DPE, like your written test. If you miss some question in your written, create a Word document with a list of the code you failed and the description associated with them. It will show the DPE that you are prepared for this check ride, and it will help him. To help my DPE and show I was prepared, I created an Excel spreadsheet with all the aeronautical requirements for commercial and where to find them in my logbook. Let me show you. Here you can see on the left the requirement and the location in my logbook with all the flights, the date and the time. It made it easier for my DPE and it showed that I was prepared for this check ride. Another example is the spreadsheet I show you to help me calculate landing and takeoff minimum. Now, don't limit yourself to the example I'm giving you. Think about what you can prepare in advance, which will help you during your check ride. Now, if you remember, we created a process to create a flight plan for the instrument check ride. Remember to update it. Let's take a look at an example and step you may want to add to show your DPE that this flight is a business flight and not a recreational flight. I added the new step in red. Check with the passenger if there is a better destination for them. The passenger may want to land at a big airport, but there is a smaller airport next to it which may be better for them. Check if they get sick in a big or small airplane. This may affect the cruising altitude you select and the way you plan the flight. Check if they went scuba diving. The flight may not be possible if they went scuba diving, and you need to check that. Do they have medical issue, sinus, stomach, headache? Check for other medical conditions to help you prepare for the flight. Change your altitude based on turbulence and passenger. You need to be more aware of the comfort of your passenger. Make sure you are not flying through turbulence as much as possible. Plan for a different way to descend if your passenger told you they get sick in an airplane. In general, you encounter more turbulence closer you are to the ground. You may want to hold your descent until the last minute to stay away from turbulence for your passenger comfort. Go over part of the briefing with the passenger, time and route, potential bad weather and turbulence. Make sure your passengers are not intoxicated or sick. Make a clear briefing before takeoff. Make sure your passengers' seats are locked and seatbelt fastened. If a passenger is sitting on the right seat, make sure he or she does not touch the flight controls or has a bag which may interfere with any of the flight control. Those are just examples of what you can add. Just think about steps which will make you look good, more professional to your DPE. For every decision you take, you need to be able to explain why. For example, if you have two similar routes to your destination, how did you decide which one to take? Make sure all your decisions are business decisions. Nothing like, I prefer this route, when in fact, there are more turbulence on the route you selected. Write down why you selected an altitude, a route, or the point for your VFR flight plan. The reason I have been mentioning the weight and balance so much is because I got caught off guard during my check ride. I put the skinniest passenger in the back for the airplane to be more stable. But the DPE asked me what will be the advantage to do the reverse, and I was not ready for this question. But during my check ride, my DPE asked me only a few questions, because for any decision I took, I explained him why. That's what you want during your check ride. This was our last item. Thanks again for watching Fly Easy Not Crazy. Remember to subscribe and press the like button if you enjoy the video.